Hello friends, Paper Historian here. I'm glad to welcome you to my channel, where we don't just tell stories, we step right into the streets, the smoke and the shadows of the past, and follow its people through the days they never thought would end. In today's video, we'll walk alongside a man who never asked for history to notice him. A simple peasant who only wanted bread on the table, a roof that didn't leak, and mornings without fear. But when the plague came, it didn't knock. It simply stepped in, sat at every table, and waited. So, settle in, let the world outside fade for a while, and listen. Because the bells are tolling, and they're not stopping for anyone tonight. You are not special, and that is your best protection most days. You are a small man in a small house with a roof that keeps out most of the rain, and a door that keeps out none of the wind. And if you had to describe your life to a saint in hopes of earning a miracle, you would run out of adjectives before you ran out of chores. Which is another way of saying you are a peasant, the sort of person a priest blesses in groups because names are expensive and time is short. Your world is a thumbprint of fields between a grey river and a darker strip of woods. A church that leans a little because faith can't always hold up stone. A market square that is mud for 9 months and dust for the other 3. And a cottage whose best quality is that it is yours if no one stronger decides otherwise. You wake when the light lifts the thatch into a shade of brown that means bread must be baked or there will be nothing to eat at noon. And you sleep when the last ember goes from red to black and the dog stops pretending to guard the door because the dog understands better than you that nothing worth stealing is inside. You are not illiterate because you cannot read. You are illiterate because you do not need to. Your day is written in the ground, and the ground has a very large hand. In spring, you scrape last year from the furrows with a wooden plough that hates stones and loves to find them. In summer, you argue with weeds and lose with dignity. In autumn, you cut the grain and promise God you will be grateful if the miller does not cheat you too obviously. In winter, you count the turnips and pretend you cannot hear them count back. When it rains, you complain about mud. When it does not rain, you complain about dust. When it does both in the same week, you say the weather is unsettled and nod sagely, as if it were a person who might take offence. You know your neighbours the way you know your own hands, by scars and by the way they reach for things. There is Martin the miller, who laughs like a man with a secret and weighs like a man who intends to keep it. There is Hans, who is as tall as a barn and about as clever, which is useful when a tree must be moved and dangerous when a decision must be made. You do not love them and you do not hate them. You live with them, and that is a more complicated verb. When they prosper, you say the Lord has smiled. When they fail, you say the Lord had his reasons. When they borrow a tool and do not return it, you say nothing and make a new tool. You do not live in town. Town is a place you visit when the hens have done you a kindness and the children have outgrown their shoes and the Lord Steward has remembered your name in a context that suggests a tax. Town is too many roofs in one place, too many people who think a wall can keep out weather, too many windows to be entirely moral. It is where the air moves differently, detouring through alleys and collecting rumours like burrs, and where the market shouts loud enough to wake the dead, or at least make them roll over. You go once a week if the road is broad and the river low. You sell onions that have learned to be brave. You buy salt that has learned to be expensive. You watch jugglers who have learned to keep 4 things in the air and ignore the 5th that is falling behind them. It is on one of those market days that the first sign arrives, and because you are the sort of man who believes signs are for people with fewer chores, you almost miss it. A cart comes in from the south with the canvas pulled low, which is unusual because most men moving something valuable want everyone to know it. The driver keeps his head down like he owes the sky money, and the horse works too hard for what looks like an easy load. When the cart stops by the taverner's door, the driver speaks to no one, drinks without looking up, and leaves the cup half full, which is not behaviour anyone recognises as human. Later, when someone bold lifts the canvas corner to prove he is bolder than the rest, he drops it quick and walks away faster, and no one calls him back. You are not a brave man, You are a practical one, which is to say, you are brave in the ways that hold your family together and cautious in the ways that keep you in the number of the living. So you do not look under the canvas and you do not ask questions that have answers shaped like nightmares. You buy your salt, you trade your onions, you listen to the market talk which, for once, is less about prices and more about priests in the city telling people to carry posies of herbs to sweeten the breath of angels, about sailors who arrived looking like sailed bones, about a bell in the harbour that has rung so often the rope has learned to fray. The road home feels longer because you are dragging something that does not make a sound. You walk faster and then slower because speed feels like fear and you do not enjoy admitting that, even to the part of yourself that has learned to be honest when no one else is listening. The fields are the same. Wheat thinking about growing, rye pretending to be wheat, sheep proving they were built for clouds and not for earth, yet the edges feel too sharp, as if the world has been traced over with a knife. When you arrive, your wife looks at you the way she looks at a pot she left too long on the coals. She does not ask what you know, she asks what you brought, and when you list salt and thread and a mended shoe, she says good and means keep talking about normal things. You make a point of noticing normal things. The chicken with the crooked toe still escapes at dawn and returns at dusk like a sinner with a schedule. The boy still loses the bucket and then finds it exactly where he left it, which is beside the well because forgetting is an art that improves with practice. The roof still leaks in the corner nearest the bed because repairs cost time and you are overdrawn. But in the middle of all this solid, ordinary life, other things slip in quietly. A neighbour who does not come to the well for 2 mornings in a row. A dog that refuses to enter a yard where it used to steal bread. A smell near the lane that is not the tanner and not the latrine and not the river and not the smithy, which leaves too many possibilities and none of them kind. The first cough you dismiss as weather, which is almost noble because a great deal of human thought is dedicated to making weather responsible for the sins of other causes. The second cough you call dust. The third cough comes from a man who never coughs, and you wonder whether dust has gotten clever since last summer. He is not family, so you nod from a distance that will not be mistaken for help, and he nods back with the effort of a man lifting a sack that refuses to admit it is grain. You do not panic because panic is for crowds and you are not a crowd. You are a pair of hands with work in them. You weed, you mend, you argue with a stubborn gait and you lose because gaits are older than pride. In the evening, you sit on the threshold and pick straw from your socks and you let your eyes go soft so the world will blur and any trouble will have to step closer before you see it. Trouble, being polite in its early stages, keeps its distance. For a few days, your wife hears first from her cousin's niece, which is exactly the sort of relationship by which news travels fastest. The girl arrives with bread that needed more flour and fear that needed less imagination. Says the city has begun to close gates at odd hours. Says the friars have been seen walking in pairs with their hoods up. Even when the sun is out, says a party of men flogged themselves through the streets to persuade God to look at them now. Says a washerwoman found a sailor blue as rainwater on his pallet at dawn and did not, as far as anyone can tell, call for help, because calling is a luxury when your voice is small. Your wife says and thank you and gives the girl onions as if they were answers. After the girl leaves, your wife looks at you the way a shepherd looks at a sky that has begun to invent new colours. You decide to go to town earlier than usual because rumours are a kind of hunger, and sometimes it helps to feed them with facts, the way it helps to feed a stray dog before it learns to bite. The road has the usual ruts, but people step around each other in a way that suggests proximity has been downgraded from virtue to risk. A man with a cart of apples has covered them with cloth and covered the cloth with prayers written by a monk who charges by the line. The apples peep like children behind a curtain, and you do not see anyone buy one. 2 boys toss stones at a rat until the rat does not move, then cheer as if they had brought down a boar. At the gate, a guard you recognise has forgotten to be bored. He pokes at travellers with a pole that is longer than your combined patience and experience, and he tells a woman with a bundle to open it while holding his breath as if he, too, believes breath has learned to carry knives. Inside the walls, the market is thinner, which is not unusual after a hard winter, but it is spring, and spring is not supposed to be this shy. A fishmonger covers his wares with mint to persuade you they were born in fragrance and not in water that has recently learned to be indecent. The baker counts loaves with the concentration of a man trying not to blink. In a contest he did not choose to enter. You see a wagon you have seen before, the canvas now tied tighter, the horse now wearing its bones nearer to the surface, the driver now drinking from a cup as if the cup owed him solace and had paid late. You do not frequent the tavern because coins prefer to live at your house, but you step inside all the same, because taverns are where talk condenses into something you can carry home without spilling. The air is vinegar and smoke, and the sweat of men who pretend to be warm when they are frightened. Someone says the word pest in a tone that suggests if the word itself were nailed to a door, it would still find a way to walk in. A clerk with ink on his fingers says Italy has already been eaten, one bite at a time, that ships bring grain and ghosts, that some houses burn vinegar in bowls because a physician in the south said the air could be trained to behave with enough discipline. A carpenter says he will believe physicians when they learn to cure poverty. The laughter is wrong at the edges. You drink nothing and leave everything, including the breath you had been holding without noticing. On the way out, you see chalk on a door, a mark you do not recognize, a circle with a slash like a wheel that has decided not to turn. You ask a vendor as if you are asking the price of onions. He says it is something the city scribes invented to remind themselves which houses to avoid when they are counting the living, which is a job no one wanted last year and everyone is afraid to have this year. He says not to touch the mark, which you were not planning to do, and then he spits because he believes spitting cancels curses, which is a theology you can admire for its practicality. You carry your thin basket home as if it were heavier than last harvest. You notice the sky has done nothing unusual, which is insulting because signs should have the decency to be visible when they intend to be fatal. Birds still risk being themselves. The river still behaves like a road for fish. The wind still refuses to change direction on command. You arrive as the sun lets go of the day. You say, "Town was quiet" in the loud way, and your wife nods in the silent way, and you both pretend the dog's restlessness is about rabbits. In the morning, there are two new absences. The cougher who is not coughing because he is not moving, and the old woman who sells nettles who has left her basket under the tree like a promise she will not keep. People talk softer because sound carries responsibility. The priest walks quickly between door and door with a bundle of small candles that are supposed to mean something even after they burn out. You watch him from the path, and you wonder if holiness is contagious in the way fear is, and you suspect it is not, though fear has a better marketing budget. You do not lock your door because doors are for weather, not fate, and because your door does not lock. You do push the bench against it at night because benches can be brave if asked nicely. The children sleep two to a pallet, and the dog sleeps in the doorway because where else would a small soul put its courage? You and your wife speak in a code you have never had to invent until now. Bread is bread, but it is also how much do we have. Onions are onions, but also how long can we pretend they last forever? Wood is wood, but also, if I go to the wood pile alone, will you notice if I do not come back quickly? You both tell jokes that deserve better laughs and give them the better laughs anyway. Days learn to repeat with a nervous energy. You wash your hands more often, which is to say, you rinse them longer in the same bucket, and you keep the bucket cleaner because cleanliness has suddenly learned to argue. You stop sharing the dipper at the well and call it manners. You move your bed away from the wall because the wall feels like a cold friend. You teach the children to sing while they scrub their fingers. Invented songs about saints who loved soap, about angels who preferred tidy poems, about devils who hated the smell of lye, and you sing too loudly because the music keeps your hands busy and your mind polite. Someone says the city closed the south gate for a day because carts came faster than graves could be dug. Someone else says a boat sank in the river and the boatman drowned with a smile because he did not have to choose whose house to visit next. Someone else says a priest fainted after his 5th burial, and when he woke, he said he had seen heaven, and it looked exactly like his mother's kitchen, and everyone agreed this was as good a description as any. You do not go to the city for a week and then 2, because the lane to the city has begun to look at you differently. You begin to keep a count you do not share. The count is not of the dead, because that would be math, and math is for people with more energy. The count is of things that feel thinner. The laughter at the well, the bread at the baker, the crows on the fence. You mark them with the small bead of worry you roll in your pocket, a habit your fingers understand better than your head. When the bead feels hot, you pray, which is to say, you say the same words slower. And then, one morning, as casual as a fly on fresh milk, there is a rat on your threshold that does not run when the door moves. It lies on its side as if tired of pretending agility, its fur in patches as if shame had a mouth, its little hands still half curled as if they had been holding something invisible and then decided to let go. You do not touch it because the dog does not, and the dog is a better physician. You shovel it into the ditch with a care that looks like respect and is actually fear dressed for church. Your wife says, the cousin's niece says, the city now has men who walk with sticks to measure how far apart people stand in line, and men who paint circles on the ground where a foot may rest, and men who shake their heads when 2 feet share a circle. You say that is clever in the way a sieve is clever at holding water, impressive for a moment. Your wife says, the cousin's niece also says, a man with a beak for a face has appeared, and you laugh because you have seen storks and you do not believe them to be doctors. And she says, no, his face is a mask stuffed with herbs, and you stop laughing because you do not enjoy being wrong when the subject is masks. Night grows teeth and you feel it in your bed. A careful distance you keep, not because you are less married, but because you are more mortal. You touch your wife's hair like a prayer that does not wish to tempt the saint it addresses. You breathe away from her because breath has become a suspect, and you hate that you know this. The children smell the new rules and they adapt, as children do. They turn hand-washing into a race and distance into a game and silence into a new kind of whisper. You tell yourself this will be a season like other seasons, a stretch of bad weather that pretends to be personal. You tell yourself saints enjoy being asked for help and will not tire of your knocking. You tell yourself the city's troubles will stay politely inside its walls, the way troubles never do. And then, just before dawn, the bell from town carries across the fields. Not once, but again and again, a flat sound that makes the dog whine and the children sit up and the bread fail to rise. And you understand in the steady, practical place where you store truths you are not ready to say aloud that something in the city has decided to be very loud. You go to the door and look toward the road without stepping through, because thresholds are honest. They remember who you were when you crossed them last, and they do not promise you will be the same when you return. The sky is ordinary. The air is ordinary. The world, cruelly, is ordinary. Only the bell is not, and the way your heart keeps time to it, like a man hauling a rope, and the way the dog leans against your leg as if to acknowledge that you too are an animal who requires leaning. You are still a small man in a small house with a roof that keeps out most of the rain, but your house has learned a new word, edge, and your day has learned a new habit, listening, and your life has learned a new arithmetic in which every touch must be counted twice, once for comfort, once for cost. You step back inside because stepping forward is a decision, and you have already made too many for one morning. Your wife meets your eyes and says nothing, which is the language you both speak best when the world is deciding something on your behalf. You slice bread thinner than yesterday, you pour water more carefully, you tell the children a story about a fox who outsmarted a storm by staying very still. And you do not tell them that foxes also die, and storms also end, and humans are not foxes, and time is an animal that does not accept training. When the sun lifts, you go to the field because you are still alive, and the field expects you. and you hoe between the rows with the slow, stubborn grace of a man who is not ready to admit that anything has changed except the angle of the light and the fact that you are counting your breaths like coins. Later, when the road from town produces a cart that does not stop at your gate and a pair of men who do not look left or right, you do not call to them because your voice has decided to stay inside your throat where it feels safer. Your neighbour waves from his doorway with only half an arm of enthusiasm, and you return the exact amount because generosity may now be measured with rulers. The dog refuses the shade and lies in the sun as if heat itself were a cure. The bell stops, and the silence it leaves behind learns to walk on two legs. By evening, the air tastes metallic, the way air does when someone has been hammering a truth all day and you have pretended not to hear. You wash your hands again and again until the skin remembers a time when it was new. You scrape dirt from under your nails with a sliver of bone. You rub the table with vinegar because vinegar has been promoted to sainthood in the church of desperation. You open the shutter and close it and open it again because the wind cannot make up its mind, whether it is friend or witness. You lie down early because fatigue has put on the mask of prudence. And you whisper a prayer older than words that says, "Keep us," which is all any prayer has ever said honestly. In the dark, your wife's breath counts to 4 and back again. Your children twitch with the ambitions of dreams. The dog growls at a mouse and forgives it. And your own heart practices a new rhythm that has learned the bell by heart. Somewhere beyond your hedge, the city is doing its own arithmetic with bodies and hours and someone else's hope. Somewhere beyond your hedge, men are deciding where to stack today so that tomorrow will have a place to stand. Somewhere beyond your hedge, the word pest has clung to a door and will not let go. You are here, still ordinary, still stubborn, still holding a day together with both hands. And if anyone asked you what is happening, you would say the bread is thinner and the bell is louder and the dog is wiser, and that will be very close to the whole truth, which is something has begun that wishes to be everywhere at once. You sleep at last in pieces and wake in pieces and fit them together with bread and water and chores, because that is how a human repairs himself when the world begins to creak. At dawn, you step outside and the air is the same and the ground is the same and your house is the same and you are not. And you understand that being a simple man will not protect you from complicated days, but it may teach you how to make them behave. One small task at a time, until the cart comes, or it does not, until the bell rings again, or it doesn't, until the road forgets how to lead to town, or remembers. You stretch your back, pick up the hoe, and decide to be alive for at least an hour, which is an ambitious promise you have always been good at keeping. You smell the city before you see it. It is not the sour sweat of summer streets, nor the usual mixture of horse dung, stale bread and wet stone that clings to any marketplace. This is heavier, meat left too long in the sun, wine soured to vinegar, and something metallic that lingers in the throat like a half-swallowed coin. People still move here, but the motion is wrong, hushed, darting, their eyes always sliding sideways as if afraid the air itself might notice them. The bells toll too often, each slow peal marking another cart, pushed toward the edge of the city where the pits wait. The market square is a parody of itself. Half the stalls are boarded shut, the other half run by men and women wearing sprigs of rosemary tied to their wrists, as if herbs could bribe death into walking past. The bakers stand behind counters with loaves wrapped in cloth, not for warmth, but to hide whether their hands are spotted. You see a pair of guards dragging a man away by the armpits, his legs kicking weakly in the dust. His mouth works soundlessly, either in prayer or in an argument with a god too busy to answer. Priests pace the streets with incense burners, the smoke curling lazily in the still air, carrying both the sweet sting of frankincense and the unspoken admission that nothing more practical can be done. Some carry small wooden crosses and press them into the hands of the faithful, or the fearful, which is nearly everyone now. A child sits on a doorstep, staring blankly at a cobblestone, rocking in time with the bells. No one stops for her. Near the northern gate, the pit is almost full. Men with shovels work without speaking, their faces tied with cloth that darkens as the day wears on. The bodies slide in, wrapped in blankets if they were loved, naked if they weren't. A friar mutters words over them, the same words he has said 100 times in the last week, until even the syllables sound tired. Somewhere in the crowd, someone coughs. The sound is sharper than the bell. And still, in pockets of the city, life pretends to go on. A tavern door opens to a burst of laughter. Too loud, too brittle. A dice game continues in an alley, the coins tossed down with an almost desperate defiance. Lovers meet in shadowed corners, as if the dark can hide them from the pestilence the way it hides their sins. It's here, weaving through this patchwork of denial and dread, that you see him again, the peasant who had only wanted to sell his grain and go home. He moves slower now, not from age, but from the weight of what he's seen. His sack is lighter, his eyes heavier. He walks past the well where women draw water through cloth, past the church steps where a man rants about the end of days, past a row of houses marked with crude chalk crosses. He stops at the edge of a square where a group gathers around a storyteller, an old man with a voice cracked like dry wood, spinning a tale about saints who once healed a city with nothing but prayers. The crowd listens, not because they believe, but because the story is easier to hold than the truth. You watch the peasant tilt his head as if trying to remember the last time he heard a story that wasn't about loss. But the spell breaks when a scream cuts through the air, high, sharp, followed by the sound of something heavy hitting stone. People scatter. A man in the street clutches his neck, dark spots blooming on his skin like spilled ink. The peasant's hand twitches toward him, then falls. He knows better. Everyone does. The man is already alone. And so he turns, pulling his coat tighter, heading toward the only place left that feels familiar, his rented room above a cooper's shop. The stairs creak under his weight. Inside, the air is no cleaner than the streets, but it smells like his own dirt, his own fear. He sits by the window, watching the smoke rise from the chimneys, each curl a reminder that some fires still burn. For now. You keep telling yourself, it's nothing. A stiffness in the joints from working in the damp. A touch of the summer heat lingering in your bones. You've lived through worse. The winter that killed half the livestock. The blight that turned the rye to powder. The time you cut your palm on a sickle and watched it fester for weeks without dying from it. You've survived too many petty injuries to let a little ache and sweat frighten you now. But still, there's something about the way the sweat clings to your skin, slick even in the morning chill, that makes you pause as you throw the last of the firewood into the cart. The cart feels heavier today. Or maybe it's you that feels lighter in all the wrong places, like someone's been secretly scooping out the insides while you weren't looking. You cough, once, twice, hard enough to make your vision swim. There's a copper taste in your mouth, but you spit into the grass before you can think too hard about it. You try not to notice the swelling under your arm, the way it presses against your shirt when you lift your arm, a tender lump that wasn't there last week. You've seen swellings before, of course, goiters, abscesses, the occasional infected tooth. But this feels different. You prod it with your fingers when no one's looking, half expecting it to vanish like a bad dream. Instead, it pulses with heat, as though your own body resents you enough to start cooking itself from the inside. Still, you have work. Work is what keeps you alive, or at least busy enough to forget you're dying. You've been hired to haul firewood to the city, something you usually do twice a year, when the richer households want to restock before the cold sets in. It's not a bad job, especially compared to breaking your back in the fields. You get to see the market square, maybe buy a small cone of honeyed nuts for your youngest if there's coin left over. The road to the city is busier than usual. That's the first sign you're not imagining things. Not the ache, not the lump, but the people, more of them than you've seen in months, moving with a kind of furtive urgency, their eyes darting at every shadow. A peddler with a cart full of candles passes you without even trying to haggle, muttering about prayers burning faster these days. A woman in a faded blue gown pulls her children closer as you approach, as if your dirt-streaked face alone could harm them. The second sign is the smell. The closer you get to the city walls, the more it changes. You're used to the scent of dung, sweat and smoke that always clings to the roads leading into town. This is something else. Sweet, almost floral, but undercut with a rot that sticks to the back of your throat. You spot little bundles of herbs and flowers tied to the doorposts of houses along the outskirts. Lavender, rosemary, marigold, anything to chase away the air. You pass a narrow ditch running alongside the road. A boy with a shaved head and an oversized tunic is tossing something into it. Sacks, maybe. You catch sight of a pale hand slipping free from one before it sinks into the sluggish water. You don't look again. By the time you reach the city gates, the sweating has turned to shivering. The guards barely look at you. They're too busy arguing with a merchant whose crates of wine are being searched for unwholesome cargo. You slip past without a word, focusing on the rattle of your cartwheels against the cobblestones, the only rhythm you trust anymore. Inside, the city feels both alive and dead at once. Stalls still line the square, but half of them are shuttered. The air rings with the clang of church bells, not for the hour, but for the dead. A priest moves from door to door, murmuring blessings no one listens to. You spot a man with a stick pushing coins across a table toward a baker, careful not to let his fingers touch the wood. The baker wears a sprig of something tucked behind his ear and doesn't meet anyone's eyes. Your delivery takes you to the richer quarter. The streets widen, the mud gives way to cleaner stone, and the houses swell in size until they seem to lean over you like watchful giants. Here, the air smells less of rot and more of clove and vinegar. Servants scurry between doorways with baskets of bread and buckets of water, their faces wrapped in cloth. From an open window, you hear laughter, loud, brittle, the kind that tries too hard to be real. The woman who answers your knock is dressed in deep green velvet, her hair pinned in a style you've only seen in the church paintings. She's holding a square of cloth to her mouth, though it doesn't stop her from speaking. "Leave the wood in the courtyard," she says, voice clipped. "Payment will be brought to you." You do as you're told, stacking the logs neatly against the wall. Through an open archway, you catch a glimpse of the garden. Immaculate hedges, benches draped in silks to keep off the morning damp. A table set for tea, as if death itself could be outweighted by etiquette. A young man sits there, flipping through a book without turning his head toward you, though his knuckles are white around the edges of the pages. When the coins arrive, dropped into your palm from the end of a long-handled ladle, you don't count them until you're out of sight. Enough for the honeyed nuts, maybe even a little extra for salt. But as you head back toward the square, you can't help noticing how the rich quarter feels like a different city entirely. No open ditches here, no bodies in sacks, no desperate bundles of herbs strung like charms. Instead, the air smells of imported spices, and the people move slower, as though time itself has been instructed to be polite in their presence. You hear talk, snatches of it, drifting from open windows and shaded balconies. A magistrate's wife boasting about her husband's foresight in sending the children to the countryside before all this unpleasantness. A merchant discussing the price of pepper, which has tripled since the borders tightened. Someone wondering aloud if the plague, as they call it, can even touch those who dine from silver plates. You don't stay to listen. The shivering has gotten worse, and every step feels like walking through water. You know enough not to linger where you don't belong, but the glimpse you've had stays with you. The way the wealthy have built a bubble of perfume and protocol around themselves, as if the right gown or the right prayer can keep out whatever's been filling the ditches outside the walls. As you guide your empty cart toward the gate, you hear the bells again, closer this time, and you wonder, not for the first time, if the sound means another poor man gone, or if the plague has finally found its way past the silk-draped gardens. You thought the city would be safer than the fields, that the stone walls would stand between you and whatever sickness the whispers in the villages spoke of. And in a way, you were right, though not in the way you hoped. The walls do keep things in. Unfortunately, you are now one of those things. The gates are shut, not to protect you from the outside, but to make sure whatever is inside doesn't go wandering off to spoil some other place's luck. The guards at the gate are thinner than you remember, and their eyes have that glassy, unfocused sheen that means either they're sick already or they've decided it doesn't matter. At first, the signs were almost polite. A cough here, a fever there, an old man slumped over his bread stall. But now the city wears the plague openly, without shame. The coughing is constant, like the sound of distant waves crashing against a shore you'll never see again. The streets smell of vinegar and smoke, not because they help, but because it's easier to believe you're fighting the sickness if you make it harder to smell the rot. Fires burn in the squares, not for warmth, but for cleansing, though no one really says what they're cleansing anymore. You live in a room above a cooper's workshop now, though the cooper himself hasn't been seen in days. At night, you hear things moving in the shop below, not footsteps, but the slow shifting of wood as if the barrels themselves are breathing. You tell yourself it's just the wind, though the windows have been shut for weeks. Food comes less often now, and when it does, it tastes of the hands that carried it, hands you've learned not to think too much about. The panic is a living thing here, running through the streets faster than the sickness, leaping from one person to another without the need for touch. It shows itself in the way people look at you, or rather, the way they don't. Eye contact has become dangerous. People seem to think the plague can crawl out through a glance and take root in their blood. You pass a mother pulling her child away from you so quickly, you hear the joint pop in the little one's arm and you can't even be angry because you probably do the same if you had someone left to protect. The church bells ring constantly now, though it's less like a call to prayer and more like a countdown. You've stopped trying to keep track of how many times they toll in a day because you've learned that when the bells go quiet, it doesn't mean the dying has stopped. It just means the bell ringer is gone. The priests walk the streets in their robes, muttering prayers over the sick, though they do it from a distance now, waving the sign of the cross like a shield. They say the plague is God's punishment, though they never quite agree on what for. You think it's a bit rich, coming from men who've never had to decide between eating mouldy bread or nothing at all. The worst part isn't the sickness, it's the sound. The coughing, the wailing, the low rattling breaths that mean someone won't make it to morning. And then there are the carts. They roll through the streets at dawn and dusk, piled high with what used to be neighbours, friends, strangers whose faces you barely recognised. Sometimes the piles shift as they pass, and you see a hand or foot twitch, and you tell yourself it's just the movement of the cart, because if it's not, then it means something worse. You've started carrying a sprig of rosemary in your sleeve, like the others do, because it's supposed to keep the sickness at bay. You don't believe it works, but it gives your hands something to do, and right now, keeping your hands busy feels like the only way to keep your mind from collapsing in on itself. You wash your face with vinegar water when you can find it, though you know the only thing it really does is sting your eyes. Nights are the hardest. The city goes quieter, but never quiet enough. Somewhere, always, there's someone coughing, someone begging, someone whispering prayers that sound more like bargains. You dream of open fields and fresh air, but when you wake, it's to the smell of too many people crammed into too small a space, breathing the same stale air, waiting for the same end. You wake with a throat like scorched parchment and a weight in your chest that wasn't there when you lay down. The air in your little room feels thicker, as if someone has draped a damp wool blanket over your lungs. You tell yourself it's the dust, the bad bread, the smoke from the cooper's fires below, anything but what it really is. But your hand betrays you, moving on its own to your neck, where you find the swelling. It's small, almost shy, but it's there. and it pulses under your fingers as if mocking the beat of your own heart. The morning outside is no kinder. You hear shouting in the street before you even open the shutters. Someone is pounding on a door across the way, demanding entry, voice cracking into something that isn't entirely human anymore. The door doesn't open. It never does. That's the new rule. You open for no one, not even God, because you can't be sure he's clean either. You think about going to the well for water, but the image rises unbidden. A rope in your hands, a bucket lifting heavy from the depths, the surface trembling with more than ripples. The faint shadow of something that might have once been a rat or might have been a child's doll. It doesn't matter. Either way, you'll drink it if you must. You always do. In the square, a crowd has gathered, not for market, but for judgment. The bailiff's voice carries above the rest, reading out names, families ordered to vacate their homes, to be escorted beyond the walls. The houses will be sealed, the contents burned. You watch from a distance as a woman clutches a bundle of cloth to her chest, the shape too small to be anything but a baby. The bailiff doesn't look at her face. He doesn't have to. The guards move her along. The city smells worse now. You can't decide if it's the pits outside the walls or the heaps of ash from the burnings within. The smoke clings to your clothes, seeps into your hair. When you pass a bakery, you see that the bread is blacker than it used to be, burned on purpose, they say, to kill whatever rides in the flour. You still buy it. You chew without tasting. In the alley behind the church, a man in a tattered robe is preaching to anyone who will listen. His voice is hoarse, his hands raw from clutching his wooden cross. He speaks of purification, of sin being burned away with the fever, of bodies made clean through death. A small circle of listeners nod along, their eyes wide, their lips moving in silent prayers or curses. You can't tell the difference anymore. And all the while, the swelling in your neck grows. You try to keep your scarf high to hide it from the curious eyes that would mark you for the pits. But you can feel it throbbing with every step, a constant reminder that the line between the living and the dead is thinner than the cloth you wear. By midday, the streets are louder. A fight has broken out near the west gate, some trying to leave, others trying to stop them. The city guard pushes through with their staves, but no one truly wins. You see a boy dart past with a loaf under his arm, chased by a butcher's apprentice with a cleaver. Neither looks at you. That's another rule now. You see nothing, you help no one. You think about leaving. The thought comes like a drop of clean water in a dirty well, clear, tempting, impossible to reach without swallowing everything else. If you leave now, you might outrun it. Or you might collapse in the fields, your body gnawed by crows before the sun sets. If you stay, the pits will take you, but perhaps not today. And today feels precious in a way it never did before. That night, you lie awake listening to the city breathe, a sound made of coughs, cries, the distant scrape of shovels. You press your palm to your throat. The swelling is hot, tender. You wonder if it will burst, and what will come out if it does. The thought should disgust you. Instead, it just makes you tired. You hear rumours, because there are always rumours, that the rich have their own cure, something they keep for themselves in locked chests, that there's a safe quarter of the city where no one has fallen ill, though no one you know has seen it, that the plague came from the east, carried by traders, or that it rose from the ground itself as punishment for digging too greedily into it. You don't know which stories to believe, so you believe them all, because at this point, what's one more impossible thing in a city full of them? And yet, despite it all, you keep moving. You rise in the morning, you find water, you eat what you can, you avoid the worst streets, you keep your distance from the coughing, not because you think it will save you, deep down you know it won't, but because survival is a habit, and habits are hard to break. The fever does not leave you, it only settles in, as though it's found a room worth renting. Days blur into each other, stitched together with moments you can't tell apart, coughing until you see black, sleeping in shallow bursts, staring at the cracks in the ceiling as if they might tell you something. The swelling in your neck has spread, creeping like a shadow into your jaw, your ear, even the corners of your vision. Eating is a memory. Drinking is an effort. Living is a negotiation you're starting to lose. The streets outside are quieter now, but not in the way you once wished. Quiet used to mean peace. Now it means absence. The markets have collapsed into silence. The smell from the pits is heavier than the air itself, and you've stopped lighting candles because the wax runs too low, too fast, and you'd rather save the light for something worth seeing, if that ever comes again. One morning, though morning means little when the sky is just another shade of ash, you wake to find the door ajar. You don't remember opening it, but you don't close it either. What's left to keep out? The city has already entered your veins. You step outside, slow as a man wading through mud, and the street greets you with the stillness of a painting no one will hang. Bodies lie as they fell, some under blankets, others left open to the air as if the sky could be persuaded to take them back. A cart passes, drawn by a single mule with the eyes of a creature that has seen too much. Two men lift what remains of a woman you half remember seeing in the market. They do not look at you, and you do not call to them. The church bell rings, but it is not calling anyone to prayer. It tolls like a clock measuring the hours of the dying. You feel the weight in your chest shift, and for a moment you think it might be mercy, the fever breaking, the illness loosening its grip. But no, it is simply your body deciding. The last of its strength will be spent on getting you to the bench by the well. You sit, you breathe. You wonder if this is the part where you see visions, angels, demons, loved ones long gone. But there's nothing. No music, no light, just the taste of iron in your mouth and the faint hum of flies settling in the air. You think, with what might be your last scrap of humour, that this is the most peace you've had since it began. And then you lie down, not because you want to, but because you can't do anything else. The stones beneath you are cool, almost kind. You look at the sky, the same colour it's been for weeks, and think, well, at least you won't have to hear that bell again. By nightfall, you are gone. No one marks the spot. No one speaks your name. But somewhere, in the blackened lungs of the city, the story of your small, stubborn survival is buried like a seed in the dirt, waiting for a time when the earth is ready to remember. In the end, the city doesn't fall with a roar, but with a sigh, the way a candle gutters out when there's nothing left to burn. The carts still come, but lighter now, not because the sickness has passed, but because there are fewer left to collect. The bells have gone quiet, their silence heavier than any sermon, and the streets belong to the crows, who don't care if their feast was once a king or a beggar.